I taught martial arts for 15 years, believing discipline and honor could protect any family. Then I drove 2 hours to surprise my wife at her college reunion with roses, only to watch her melt into another man's arms like I was invisible. When she collapsed seconds later, I realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was war, and she'd been planning it for months. My name is Dwayne Crawford. I'm 43 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years running a martial arts school in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Built it from nothing with my bare hands and a borrowed down payment. The Crawford Fighting Academy isn't just a business to me. It's a legacy I plan to pass down to my son Travis. Every morning at 5:30, I unlock those doors and turn on the lights, watching the sun creep through the windows onto mats where I've taught hundreds of kids how to defend themselves, how to stand tall, how to never back down from what's right. I married Renee 12 years ago, back when she was still impressed by the discipline and focus that made me successful. She used to sit in the back during classes, watching me demonstrate techniques to my students, and I could see the pride in her eyes. That woman believed in me, believed in what we were building together. Travis came along 1 year later, and for a while life felt like one of those perfect kata forms. Every movement flowing into the next with purpose and precision. But somewhere along the way, that rhythm got disrupted. Renee started complaining that I was too rigid, too set in my routines. She said I treated our marriage like a training regimen instead of a relationship. I thought she was just going through a phase, you know? Every marriage has rough patches. I figured if I stayed consistent, kept providing for my family, kept being the rock they could count on, everything would work itself out. The first real warning came 3 months ago when Renee mentioned her 20-year college reunion. She hadn't talked about those people in years, always said college was ancient history. But suddenly she was scrolling through Facebook, reconnecting with old classmates, getting excited about seeing faces she claimed to have forgotten. When I asked her about it, she got defensive. "Can't a woman be curious about her past, Dwayne?" She snapped, closing her laptop a little too quickly. "Just because you never think about anything except this gym doesn't mean the rest of us have to live in a bubble." That stung, but I let it slide. I've learned that sometimes the best defense is knowing when not to engage. But then came the dress shopping, the hair appointments, the way she started working out with a trainer at the fancy gym across town instead of using our perfectly good equipment at home. She was preparing for something, and it wasn't just a casual dinner with old friends. The night before she left for the reunion in Des Moines, I found her standing in our bedroom mirror, smoothing down that red dress. She looked beautiful, dangerous beautiful, like a weapon disguised as art. I should have said something then. Should have asked her what she was really going to that reunion for. Instead, I kissed her cheek and told her to have fun. Sometimes being strong means knowing when to fight. But sometimes it means recognizing when the fight's already over, and you're just the last one to get the memo. I wasn't supposed to be there. That's what made it so much worse, when everything fell apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. Renee thought I was teaching a late class at the dojo, but I'd canceled it to surprise her. Drove 2 hours to Des Moines with a bouquet of her favorite roses, planning to take her to dinner after the reunion. Show her that her husband could be spontaneous too. The Marriott Ballroom was buzzing with forced nostalgia and expensive cologne. I stood near the entrance, scanning the crowd for that red dress, when I spotted her across the room. She was laughing at something a tall man in a charcoal suit was saying, and for a moment, I forgot why I was upset about anything. She looked radiant, alive in a way I hadn't seen in months. Then I saw who she was talking to. Dr. Orson Blake. I recognized him from the college photos Renee kept in our attic, the one she claimed didn't matter anymore. He looked exactly like the kind of man who'd aged well on purpose, silver at his temples, confident smile, the whole 9 yards. And my wife was hanging on every word like he was delivering the Sermon on the Mount. I started walking toward them, roses in hand, ready to play the part of the loving husband. But before I could reach them, something happened that knocked the wind out of me harder than any punch I'd ever taken in the ring. At the reunion, she embraced him like I didn't exist. Not a polite hug between old friends, but the kind of embrace that speaks a language only lovers understand. Her arms went around his neck, her body pressed against his chest, and she held on like she was drowning, and he was the only life preserver in the ocean. For those 5 seconds, 12 years of marriage evaporated. I became invisible, erased from her personal history like a mistake in pencil. Then suddenly, she collapsed. It happened so fast that half the room didn't even notice at first. One moment she was in his arms. The next she was crumpling to the floor like her strings had been cut. Dr. Blake caught her partway down, calling her name in a voice that was way too familiar for my liking. "Renee! Renee, can you hear me?" People started gathering around. Someone shouted for a doctor, and the reunion crowd transformed into a medical emergency scene. I stood there holding those stupid roses, watching my wife's face turn pale as paper while another man cradled her head in his lap. That's when she opened her eyes and saw me standing there. The look on her face wasn't relief or gratitude. It was pure, undiluted terror, like she just realized her worst nightmare had come true. "He saw me," she whispered, so quietly that only Blake and I could hear it. Not, "Help me," or "What happened," or "I'm okay." Just those 3 words that confirmed what I already knew in my gut. This wasn't an accident. This was exposure. And judging by the way Dr. Blake's jaw tightened when he saw me standing there, they both knew exactly what had just been revealed. I dropped the roses and walked out of that ballroom, leaving my wife in the arms of the man she'd never gotten over. The next morning hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. I'd spent the night in a motel room that smelled like stale cigarettes and broken dreams, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. My phone had been buzzing all night. Missed calls from Renee, from the hospital, from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. But I'm not the kind of man who runs from a fight, even when the battlefield is an emergency room and the enemy is the truth. I found Renee in room 314, propped up against sterile white pillows, looking smaller than I'd seen her in years. She was awake, alert, and terrified. The moment I walked through that door, her face went through more emotions than a poker player with a bad hand. "Dwayne," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect you to come." I pulled up the visitor's chair and I sat down, keeping my voice level. "You're my wife, Renee. Where else would I be?" She started crying then, not the dramatic sobbing you see in movies, but the quiet, defeated kind of tears that come when someone knows they've been caught red-handed. "The doctor says you're pregnant," I said, cutting straight to the heart of it. "Congratulations. When were you planning to tell me?" Her face went white as the hospital sheets. "How did you?" "Blood work doesn't lie, Renee. Neither do calendars. We haven't been intimate in 3 months, not since you started your fitness journey and began working late at the nursing home." She closed her eyes like she could make this conversation disappear. "Dwayne, please." "Please what?" "Please pretend I didn't see you wrapped around another man like he was your salvation. Please act like I don't know whose baby you're carrying." The words came out harder than I intended, but 15 years of teaching discipline had taught me that sometimes you need to break through someone's defenses to reach the truth underneath. Renee opened her eyes, and for the first time in months, I saw the woman I'd married looking back at me. Not the distant stranger who'd been sharing my bed, but the real Renee, scared, ashamed, and finally ready to stop lying. "I never meant for this to happen," she said. "Orson reached out to me 6 months ago. He said he'd never gotten over losing me in college. He made me feel like the person I used to be before I became just Travis's mom and your wife." I leaned back in the chair, processing the timeline. 6 months of deception. 6 months of planning. This wasn't some spontaneous mistake. This was a calculated betrayal. "So you decided to relive your college glory days and accidentally got pregnant." It wasn't supposed to go that far. I thought I could just feel wanted again without crossing any lines. "But you did cross lines. All of them." She nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I know, and I hate myself for it." I left the hospital with more questions than answers, but one thing was crystal clear. I wasn't going to let Dr. Orson Blake disappear into the shadows while my life imploded. A man who'd steal another man's wife needed to look that man in the eye and explain himself. Finding him wasn't hard. A quick search showed he taught behavioral psychology at Drake University, just 20 minutes from the hospital. His office was in the Humanities building, 3rd floor, corner office with a view of the campus quad. The kind of setup that probably impressed the hell out of my wife. I knocked on his door frame. He looked up from his computer, and I saw a recognition flash across his face followed by something that might have been fear. "Mr. Crawford," he said, standing up but staying behind his desk like it could protect him. "I was wondering when you show up. Where are you now?" I stepped into his office and closed the door behind me. "That's interesting," Because I was wondering when you were going to explain why you've been having an affair with my pregnant wife. He flinched at my directness, but recovered quickly. I think you should know that Renee came to me, not the other way around. She reached out first. So that makes it okay. A married woman with a child contacts you, and your first instinct is to jump into bed with her. Blake sat back down, trying to regain some authority. You don't understand the situation. Renee was desperately unhappy. She felt trapped, invisible. I offered her emotional support. Emotional support? I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you saw a vulnerable woman and decided to take advantage. She's a grown woman, capable of making her own decisions. She's also married with an 11-year-old son who thinks the world of his mother. Did that factor into your emotional support? For the first time, Blake looked uncomfortable. I didn't set out to hurt anyone. I moved closer to his desk, letting him see exactly how serious I was. But you did hurt people. You hurt my family. And now you're going to fix it. What do you mean? I mean you're going to end this thing with my wife today. You're going to tell her it was a mistake, that you're not leaving your comfortable academic life for her, and that she needs to focus on her real family. Blake's face hardened. You can't tell me what to do. And you can't control Renee's choices. Maybe not. But I can make your life very complicated if you don't do the right thing here. He leaned forward, challenge in his eyes. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining consequences. You see, Dr. Blake, I've been doing some research on you. Turns out you have quite the reputation for getting involved with former students and vulnerable women. The university administration might be very interested in hearing about your pattern of behavior. The color drained from his face. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Because I've already spoken to 3 other women who have very similar stories about the great Dr. Orson Blake and his special brand of emotional support. I'll let that sink in for a moment before continuing. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call my wife and end this. Today, or tomorrow morning, the university board gets a very detailed report about your extracurricular activities. Blake was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. Finally, he looked up at me. And if I do this, you'll leave me alone? If you stay away from my family, we'll never have to see each other again. He nodded slowly. Fine. I'll call her today. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Dr. Blake, next time you want to offer someone emotional support, maybe try recommending a therapist instead. The drive home from Blake's office should have felt like a victory, but something was eating at me. Renee had been distant for months, sure, but there were things that didn't add up. Little comments Travis had made, the way he'd started avoiding his mother, how he'd been spending more time at the dojo after school instead of going straight home. I found him in our backyard, practicing the kata forms I'd taught him, but his movements were sloppy, unfocused. His mind was somewhere else entirely. Your form's off, son, I called out, walking toward him. Want to talk about what's bothering you? Travis stopped mid-movement and looked at me with eyes that seemed too old for an 11-year-old face. Dad, is Mom getting divorced from us? The question hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. What makes you ask that, buddy? He sat down on the back steps, and I joined him. For a moment, we just watched the sunset paint the sky orange and red. I heard her talking on the phone sometimes, he said quietly. Late at night when she thought I was asleep. She'd say things like, I can't keep living like this, and maybe it's time to start over. My chest tightened. How long have you been hearing these conversations? Since winter. Maybe longer. He picked at the grass beside the steps. She talks to someone named Orson. A lot. And Dad. She sounds different when she talks to him. Like happy. Happier than she sounds with us. I put my arm around my son's shoulders, trying to process what he was telling me. Travis had been carrying this burden for months, watching his mother emotionally check out of their family while I was too busy running the dojo to notice. Why didn't you tell me about this before? Travis shrugged. I thought maybe if I was better at karate, or got better grades, or helped more around the house, she'd want to stay. That broke something inside me. My 11-year-old son had been trying to save his parents' marriage by being perfect, while his mother was planning her escape with another man. Travis, listen to me. None of this is your fault. You're an amazing kid, and nothing you could have done would have changed what's happening with your mom. Is she really having a baby with that Orson guy? I stared at him. How do you know about that? I heard her on the phone yesterday morning. She was crying and saying she didn't know how to tell you about the baby. So much for breaking the news gently. My son had been living with secrets that would have destroyed most adults, and he'd been handling it with more maturity than his mother. Yeah, buddy. She is. Travis nodded like he'd expected that answer. Are you going to make her leave? I'm going to make sure you're okay first. Everything else comes after that. Blake called that evening, just as I was helping Travis with his homework. His voice was tight, professional, like he was discussing a business transaction instead of the destruction of my family. I spoke with Renee, he said without preamble. I told her we needed to end things. And she didn't take it well. She's convinced you forced me to break up with her. I stepped out onto the front porch so Travis couldn't hear. I don't care what she's convinced of. What matters is that you stay away from my family. There's something else you should know, Blake continued. Renee has been talking about leaving Cedar Falls entirely, taking Travis and starting fresh somewhere else. My blood went cold. Over my dead body. She seems to think she can convince a court that you're too controlling, too rigid. She's been documenting incidents for months, times you've corrected her behavior, insisted on family routines, that sort of thing. You mean times I've acted like a responsible husband and father? I'm just telling you what she's planning. She wants to paint you as emotionally abusive to gain primary custody. The phone went silent for a moment while I processed this information. Renee wasn't just leaving me. She was trying to take my son and destroy my reputation in the process. Why are you telling me this, Blake? Because despite what you think of me, I'm not a monster. That kid doesn't deserve to be used as a weapon in his parents' war. Funny how you developed a conscience after I threatened your career. Maybe, but the warning stands. She's meeting with a lawyer tomorrow morning. After he hung up, I sat on the porch steps and tried to figure out my next move. Renee had been planning this betrayal for months, documenting every moment of normal parental authority as evidence of abuse. She was going to try to steal my son and my reputation in one coordinated attack. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the man she'd been living with for 12 years. I'd spent 15 years teaching people how to defend themselves, how to stay calm under pressure, how to think strategically when everything was falling apart. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. If Renee wanted a fight, she was about to get one. But this time, I'd be ready. The first call was to my lawyer. The second was to my sister Violet, who worked as a private investigator. The third was to the gym's security system, which had been recording every conversation in our house for the past year thanks to the cameras I'd installed after a break-in attempt. If Renee thought she could rewrite history to make me the villain, she was about to learn that the truth has a way of fighting back. My lawyer, Marcus Webb, was the kind of man who wore suspenders unironically and treated family law like military strategy. He'd been handling divorces in Cedar Falls for 25 years, and his track record spoke for itself. When I walked into his office Monday morning with a box of evidence, he knew this wasn't going to be a typical case. Dwayne, Marcus said, examining the printed emails I'd pulled from our home computer, these are damning. Your wife documented her entire affair in digital format. That's not even the best part, I replied, pulling out my tablet. The house has had security cameras since last year. Audio and video. Everything. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Please tell me you're not about to show me footage of your wife committing adultery in your home. Nothing like that. But I do have recordings of her phone conversations with Blake, including the ones where she discusses taking Travis out of state and claiming I'm abusive. I played him 3 separate recordings where Renee talked about her escape plan and how she'd convince a court that my military-style discipline made me an unfit father. Marcus took notes while listening, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. This is conspiracy to commit parental kidnapping, he said when the recordings finished. She's not just planning to leave you. She's planning to steal your son and destroy your reputation in the process. Can we stop her with this evidence? Absolutely. But Dwayne, you need to understand something. Once we file these recordings and emails in court, your private life becomes public record. Everyone in town will know exactly what happened. I thought about Travis, about the dojo, about the reputation I'd spent 15 years building. Then I thought about my son trying to be perfect to save his parents' marriage while his mother planned to rip him away from everything he'd ever known. File everything. I'd rather have people know the truth than let her get away with this. Marcus nodded. There's something else. I've been asking around about Dr. Blake, and you're not his first victim. There are at least 2 other men in the state who've dealt with similar situations involving him. What are you saying? I'm saying we might be able to establish a pattern of predatory behavior. If we can get those other men to testify about Blake's methods, We can paint a picture of deliberate manipulation rather than a simple affair. The idea of turning this into a larger case appealed to me. Blake needed to face consequences for more than just what he'd done to my family. Set it up, I said. I want to meet these other men. Before we go down that road, I need to ask you something important. Are you doing this to save your marriage, or to win custody of your son? The question stopped me cold. I realized I hadn't even considered the possibility of reconciling with Renee. The woman who'd planned to kidnap my child and destroy my name wasn't someone I could trust again. I want my son, I said finally. Everything else is negotiable. Marcus smiled grimly. Good, because with this evidence, that's exactly what you're going to get. Meeting Jake Morrison and Pete Sullivan felt like joining a brotherhood I'd never wanted to be part of. Both men had been through the Blake experience. Educated, successful husbands who'd watched their wives disappear into emotional affairs that became physical relationships that became custody battles. We met at a diner outside town. 3 men who should have been strangers but shared a common enemy. Jake owned a construction company and had lost his wife to Blake 2 years earlier. Pete was a veterinarian whose marriage had imploded just last year. The pattern's always the same. Jake explained over coffee that none of us were really drinking. Blake finds women in their late 30s who are feeling trapped. Mothers who gave up careers. Wives who feel invisible. He contacts them through social media, usually LinkedIn because it looks professional. Pete nodded. He starts with intellectual conversations. Tells them they're too smart for their circumstances, that they're wasting their potential in suburban marriages. Makes them feel special. Then comes the emotional manipulation. Jake continued. He positions himself as the understanding friend while painting the husband as controlling or emotionally distant. By the time the physical relationship starts, the woman is already convinced her marriage was a mistake. I listened to their stories and heard my own reflected back at me. Renee's complaints about feeling invisible, her sudden interest in fitness and appearance, the way she'd started criticizing my rigid approach to family life. It had all been scripted. How did your custody battles go? I asked. Jake's face darkened. Blake coached my ex-wife on what to say to make me look abusive. Told her to document every time I raised my voice or enforced household rules. She almost got primary custody. What stopped her? Blake got sloppy. Started texting my ex during the court proceedings, trying to influence her testimony. My lawyer subpoenaed his phone records and found communications with 3 other women going through divorces. Judge wasn't impressed. Pete leaned forward. That's why we're willing to testify in your case. Blake's still out there, still targeting vulnerable women. He needs to be stopped. The university's been protecting him, Jake added. Tenure, academic freedom, all that garbage. But if we can establish a pattern in family court, it might give the administration enough cover to finally act. I thought about Travis, about all the other kids who'd been collateral damage in Blake's emotional manipulation campaigns. What do you need from me? Everything you've got, Pete said. Recordings, emails, documentation of the timeline. We're building a case that shows deliberate predatory behavior, not just random affairs. And in return, we testify about Blake's methods. Show the court that what happened to your wife wasn't unique. It was calculated. I shook hands with both men, feeling something I hadn't experienced since this whole nightmare began. Hope. Blake had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed his victims would suffer in silence, protecting their own reputations while he moved on to his next target. He'd never considered the possibility that his victims might fight back together. There's one more thing, Jake said as we prepare to leave. Blake's tenure review is coming up next year. If we can get this information to the right people at the university, it might be enough to finally end his career. You mean the 15th element we discussed? I said, referencing the academic corruption angle we'd identified. Exactly. Time to make sure Dr. Blake faces consequences for all the families he's destroyed. The custody hearing lasted 3 days, but the outcome was decided in the first hour when Marcus played the recordings of Renee discussing her escape plan with Blake. Judge Patricia Henley had presided over family court for 15 years, and I could see her expression harden as she listened to my wife casually plan to kidnap our son. Renee's lawyer tried to spin it as the desperate words of an abused woman, but the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage showed months of normal family interactions, contradicting every claim of emotional abuse she documented. When Jake Morrison and Pete Sullivan testified about Blake's pattern of coaching women to make false allegations, the judge's questions became sharper. "Dr. Blake," Judge Henley said when he took the stand, "are you aware that you've been named in 3 separate custody cases involving similar allegations of spousal abuse?" Blake's composure finally slipped. "Your Honor, I was merely providing emotional support to women in distress." Emotional support that resulted in pregnancy and parental alienation. The university had already suspended Blake pending their own investigation, thanks to the evidence we provided. His tenure review was permanently tabled, and rumors suggested criminal charges might follow. When it came time for Renee to testify, she could barely look at me. The confident woman who'd planned to steal my son had been replaced by someone who understood the full scope of her betrayal. Blake had abandoned her the moment legal pressure appeared, leaving her to face the consequences alone. "Mrs. Crawford," Judge Henley asked, "do you still maintain that removing Travis from his father's custody would be in the child's best interest?" Renee glanced at her lawyer, then at me, then down at her hands. "No, Your Honor. I think Travis should stay with his father." The judge awarded me primary custody with supervised visitation for Renee. The house, the dojo, the life I'd built, it all stayed intact. More importantly, Travis wouldn't be used as a weapon in his mother's war against reality. After the hearing, Renee approached me in the courthouse hallway. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her choices. "I'm sorry, Dwayne," she said quietly. "I don't know who I became these past months." "You became someone who forgot what mattered," I replied. "But Travis still needs his mother. Just not the version of her that was willing to destroy his family for a fantasy." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "The baby. What am I supposed to do about the baby? That's between you and Blake. But understand this. If you try to bring that child around Travis without his consent, we'll have problems. Will you ever forgive me?" I thought about that question for a long moment. "I'll forgive you for Travis's sake, but I'll never trust you again." 6 months later, life had settled into a new rhythm. Travis and I had turned the guest room into a proper bedroom for him, and he'd thrown himself into his martial arts training with renewed focus. The dojo was busier than ever. Apparently, word had gotten around about a man who'd fought for his family and won. Renee had moved to Des Moines and found work at a nursing facility there. She visited Travis every other weekend, and to her credit, she'd been consistent about it. The baby, a girl named Sarah, was born healthy, and Blake had been court-ordered to pay child support despite his attempts to deny paternity. The university had ultimately fired Blake after our evidence helped 3 more women come forward. He'd lost his tenure, his reputation, and his ability to prey on vulnerable families. Last I heard, he was teaching at a community college in another state, hopefully under closer supervision. Travis adjusted better than I'd expected. Kids are resilient, and having the truth out in the open seemed to relieve him of the burden he'd been carrying. He'd started bringing friends to the dojo again, and his grades had improved significantly. "Dad," he said one evening as we worked on a new cutoff form together, "are you going to get married again?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about it. "Why?" "Because Mrs. Patterson from the hardware store asked me if you were seeing anyone." I laughed. "Small towns and their matchmaking networks. What did you tell her?" "That you were too busy teaching me to be awesome to worry about dating." "Smart kid. But Travis, if I ever did meet someone, how would you feel about that?" He considered this seriously. "I think I want to meet her first. Make sure she's not crazy like Mom was." Out of the mouths of babes. "Deal. You get veto power over any future relationships." "Good. Because I have high standards." As winter turned to spring, I found myself grateful for the hard lessons we'd learned. The marriage I thought was solid had been built on sand, but the relationship I had with my son was bedrock. We'd survived the storm together, and we'd emerged stronger. The dojo had a new motto painted on the wall: honor, discipline, family. Students asked about it sometimes, and I'd tell them that in martial arts, like in life, you learn who you really are when everything falls apart. Some men crumble under pressure. Others discover they're stronger than they ever imagined. Travis and I fell into the second category, and that made all the difference.